had this theory in my head for a bit now. The more I think about and learn about human nature, how we function, think about the meaning of life, our consciousness, why we're here, all that stuff, that we weren't supposed to gain consciousness as humans. That supposed to word is a funny word, right? Because it implies a lot of things. It implies somebody designed it. It implies there was intention, some vision of why we got it, right? So let's put that aside for a second. But just in a very simple way, it seems like when you look at all the facts, consciousness may have been a mistake, a flaw in the design, if you will, whether that design have been random or whatever. It wasn't the best case scenario for it to happen. And I think there's a few different things that illustrate why maybe that's true. Some primal, like basic things about us. Sex, food, and death. If you think about sex, food, and death, I think you can make a strong argument that consciousness warped those things. Consciousness paired with each of those things creates like a what the fuck is going on type situation, right? It's not all bad. There's some positives in it, right? Because consciousness, by definition, being aware, being able to look at something, understand it, question it, challenge it, try and improve it, those are good things, right? There's positive aspects in that. So it's not like it's been like everything about it's been negative, but I think it's net negative. So let's take each one, right? Food. Let's start with the simplest one, maybe the safest one. Food is a basic primal need, right? Every animal that walks this planet, every organism, even plants, right? There's things, there's nutrients it needs to take in to allow this biological system to function and to grow. I'm by no means an expert in biology or evolution or any of that, but I'm enough to be dangerous in that from an evolutionary perspective, there are things that formed in us, systems that developed that encouraged us, incentivized us to go get food, to want food, to consume food, because we need it. Our bodies need it. So taste buds, as an example, right? Simple example. That allows us to enjoy the sensation of food, makes us want it more, right? That type of thing. When you think about that primal system that's in place, right? Us wanting food, but then you layer in consciousness. And now we're able to look at it and think about it. And that base thing is still there. We fucking love food. It's what we need. It's the thing that at a very base level, our body yearns for. And now you've given us this consciousness to be aware of that and to understand how important food is to us, to have this primitive drive towards it. But then you pair it in consciousness where we're allowed to try and do something with it, to be thoughtful about it, rather than just use it as its intended purpose, right? Like my dog would do, who's here. We're like, oh, food, I eat it, good, okay. And then go about my business. We've been able to be like, well, what can we do with food? Can we make it taste even more delicious? Can we find ways in which we can consume it even more? Can we make traditions and rituals around it where we just gorge ourselves with food? All different ways in which our ability to be conscious and aware of this basic biological drive and desire, how it's allowed us to bastardize the shit out of it, and in many ways create unhealthy, what we would call unhealthy relationships with food, right? The obesity that we see, the way in which we crave food and we do overindulge on it and we do think about it so much and it becomes such a central part of our lives and how we function. I mean, for me personally, like the idea that I know how positively my body responds to something that it thinks it needs, the things I can do with that and the ways in which I can just be a glutton and so much of my time is spent thinking about my next meal and what I'm going to eat in the restaurant I might go to, what am I going to order and what about dessert and then the supermarket. It dominates our lives because we weren't meant to be able to think about it to allow it to dominate our lives. We were meant to just have this drive, go get it, and then okay. Sex. Let's talk about sex. Very similar, right? You can start to see some parallels there between sex. Base, primitive, evolutionary function to serve a purpose that now we're aware of, right? And maybe sex, depends on the person, even more so than food, right? You take something that from a biological, evolutionary perspective was designed to be good. We needed to incentivize species to want to reproduce. So there's nerve endings in certain areas, right? There's sensations that are felt. Just like with food, our body gives a reaction of like, yes, this, I want this, I want this, like, let's do this. And then you get consciousness and you become aware of it. And you could stop and reflect and pause and think about how amazing that is. And how, when I think about it, just like food, that's one of the most amazing things that exists in the world. And that's all rooted in the fact that my basic primitive system needs it, but it doesn't matter. For me, I just know that's good. And what do? Same thing. We bastardize it, right? We say, how can I get more? I want more of that. Think of like, we're somewhat better today, obviously, but throughout human history, when consciousness started to evolve and sex started to become a thing that we even were aware of and can talk about and can understand, it wasn't soon after, I would imagine, to where rape starts to come in, to where individuals with consciousness say, that is good. I want that. I go take that. I go get it. I want it, right? And all the ways that society, we know this, right, has formed around the idea of sex, the things we value, the way people are supposed to look, why we want power, why we want money, why we want good jobs. In many ways, it fuels capitalism because it's all rooted in that. We've become so sophisticated and thought so much about this amazing thing that evolution gave us. And now we've taken it and said, well, I want all of it in every way possible. I want to optimize for it. And we've taken it and we've bastardized it. And our consciousness has allowed us, it's almost like our consciousness can't handle that. We can't handle the fact that something that good is out there, that we're not supposed to be aware of that. It's supposed to be just like with food. Like, yes, there's a time in which we reproduce and we go and we have sex and hopefully have a baby, and then the species continues and then we move on. When we can stop and think about, but I really enjoyed that. I want more of that. The things we're willing to do to get that, the ways in which we're willing to act. Rape being obviously maybe the most extreme example of it. To me, it's not a coincidence, it's not a surprise that rape is such a predominant thing throughout human history and even still today, because you took something that we weren't meant to be able to think about and ponder about, what are more ways I can get that feeling. It's too strong, it's too powerful to have consciousness paired with it. And then the last one, death. Death is it's cliche to some extent at this point, but even as I say it, I'll be uncomfortable and probably many of you listening will be uncomfortable. We're all going to die. We know that, right? We can kind of hear that statement and be like, yeah, no, I know it. The way I often like to think about it is there's going to be a moment in all of our lives, if we're lucky, arguably, depending on how we die, but for most of us, there's going to be a moment where we know we're going to die. We know, like, it's coming, like it's here. Maybe it's, I just got a cancer diagnosis and I have a few months to live. Maybe it's, I've already been sick, or I got injured in some horrific accident and now I'm aware, like, this isn't looking good. I'm not gonna make it through this. Or maybe we're in some horrific, situation where there's some violence being perpetrated, right? A shooting of some sort, whatever it is. There's gonna be a moment in time in which I will be fully aware and conscious and cognizant of the fact that this whole thing, everything I know, the only thing that I know, everything, existence for me is about to end. How in the fuck are we supposed to process that with consciousness and function with that, right? To me, that's another example of one of those things. We weren't supposed to be aware of that, it would seem, right? The idea that we can be aware that that moment is coming, that sensation of knowing this whole thing is about to end, it's why we hide from it as much as we do. It's why we don't want to think about that as much as we do. It's why many of us think we'd be so much better off if we were like my dog, who has no idea, who's just running around, eating, just having a good time, doing whatever, and then one day we'll die. And that's okay for her. But for us, we have to try and function and live with the fact that that moment's coming. We have to try and grapple with that. The anxiety, the fear, the tension, the depression, the pressure, all of the things that get loaded on when we're aware of that fact. And it just gives me another example of something when I look at it where it says, it doesn't seem like it benefits us to be aware of that. It doesn't seem like it would make sense to set it up that way, to where we are conscious of this fact that is in some ways the most unbelievable, like unable to process concept that exists. Right? Our minds need to process that. Our minds need to think through it and think, what does it mean that I'm going to die? But our mind, that's everything we know. Our minds are trying to process the elimination of itself and its existence of itself. It can't do that. How is it meant to do that? And you look at that, just like with food, just like with sex, and you say, I don't know, man. I look at that and I say, those things seem like they were set up and designed as part of this overall universe and planet and how this whole thing functions, the whole overall ecosystem, in a way in which nobody was ever supposed to be aware of it. It's almost like thinking about being aware of our blood flowing through, like if we could feel it, the blood flowing through our body, right? Like imagine all of a sudden right now it's just turned on. How weird. Like how would we handle that? Like we wouldn't know it, like we're not supposed to feel that. It's just supposed to be going on underneath, right? Stupid simple example, but to me that's how I think consciousness kind of functions. And those three mega ultra concepts and priorities in our life I think illustrate that.